Today we're going to talk about how the Cold War impacted the war during the 1970s and 80s. Really, we're going all the way to the end, so 1991. So between 1965 and 1973, the United States was involved in Vietnam. Here is Vietnam. And we were involved because of the domino theory. Remember, if one country falls, and everything that touches it will fall to communism. So the Soviet Union is up here. Here's China. And here's North Korea, South Korea. So we were afraid because Vietnam touches China that it's going to fall to communism. It also touches Laos and Cambodia, which eventually did fall to communism. So Ho Chi Minh is the communist leader. He helped get rid of the Japanese in Vietnam during World War II. The Soviets had backed him doing that. So after World War II, the Vietnamese fought with the French for independence. And the the northern part of Vietnam was communist and supported by the Soviet Union, and the southern part was a democracy and supported by the United States. So in South Vietnam, there's the Viet Cong, and they're trying to unify North and South under communism. So to contain communism, the United States started sending troops. But before then, in 1954, we were sending advisors. So it was a police action from 1954. Troops for fighting, as they were labeled, were not sent until 1965. American troops also used pesticides like Agent Orange to destroy the foliage in the jungle, because this was a different type of fighting for United States military. We had bombing raids just like they did during World War II. But these missions were a little different because of the jungle. We also used napalm to bomb the jungle. So the Vietnamese went underground and started building tunnels. So these tunnels made it really hard for the United States to defeat the communists. They also looked exactly like the non-communists, so it was hard to know who your enemy was. This war was extremely expensive, and it became very unpopular after some of the war footage was aired on TV, where you saw women and children dying. Again, it's kind of like in Afghanistan. It's hard to know who the enemy is. So in 1973, the United States withdrew from Vietnam, and 2 years later, the communists. So when we withdrew, it ended just like the Korean War divided. So it was divided at the 19th parallel. But in 1975, the Northern Communists invaded the Southern democracy, and they overthrew the democracy. So Vietnam became communist. So the United States stopped saying it was going to contain communism, and we looked for different ways to fight it. So Richard Nixon's policy, he was the president right at the end of the Vietnam War from 72 to 74. He decided to try détente. Détente is a French word, and it means friendship. So we're easing Cold War tensions instead of going to the brink of war. So in order to symbolize this, he went to China. And he was the first president to visit the mainland of China, because the United States had maintained that the democratic government that had fled to Taiwan was the actual government of China and not the mainland Chinese. So he's visiting the Great Wall. So Nixon's visit put pressure on the Soviet Union so that they're going to negotiate with the United States. So Nixon met with Brezhnev, who was the leader of the Soviet Union. Brezhnev, excuse me. I got my communist leaders mixed up. So Brezhnev and Nixon talked about reducing arms. This is the ICBM. So we signed the Strategic Arms Limitation Talks, which is SALT, and this limited the number of ICBMs, or intercontinental ballistic missiles, that each country could have. And it seemed to be going pretty good. But then the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, and the United States funded the Taliban, who was on the democracy side This war pitted us against each other. Again, it really hurt the Soviet Union's economy. But because of the invasion of Afghanistan, we stopped using détente. The United States viewed this as an attempt to spread communism in South Asia and the Middle East. Remember, we had put down a communist takeover in Iran, so we wanted to stop that. So the United States stopped all trade with the Soviet Union. This really hurts their economy, and we helped the Afghan rebels. And believe it or not, they're using our own weapons against us in Afghanistan, which is kind of interesting. But here's about the Taliban that we helped start. So in the 1980s, the two leaders changed directions in the Cold War. We've got Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev. So Ronald Reagan took a really strong stand against communism, and his goal was to restore America's position as being dominant. And how he did this was through an arms race, especially in space. So he referred to the Soviet Union as evil and spent $2 trillion to increase the size of the military. This quadrupled the United States debt, and we are still dealing with that debt today. He also sent intercontinental ballistic missiles to Western Europe, to our NATO allies. But the biggest program, and the one that we still don't know if it works or not, is called the Strategic Defense Initiative, or nicknamed Star Wars. And what it's supposed to do is intercept missiles. So you have a satellite here, and if a missile comes up, it's supposed to shoot the missiles down before they can land on their targets. So here's an artist rendition. We don't know if it works. Mikhail Gorbachev became the Soviet leader in 1982, and because the economy was so bad, he decided to change some things. Socialism was really not working because what was your incentive for hard work? If you're making exactly the same as the person sitting beside you who's taking a nap, why should you not take a nap? So this led to low industrial and agricultural production. The Soviet Union spent over half of its budget on military and fighting the war in Afghanistan. It was said that, or it's still true, that the Soviet Union had more missiles than they have toilet paper. So if you ever get to visit Russia, take toilet paper and blue jeans because they are still a hot commodity on the black market. It was just they were producing more military weapons than they were things for their people, like bread. So they were trying to compete with Star Wars, and that was super expensive, and their economy was doing bad, so they couldn't. In the past, the government had limited freedom of speech and elections. So Mikhail Gorbachev decided he was going to change that because it's not working. So he introduced glasnost, which means openness, and you have freedom of speech. I apologize for the picture being in front of it. So you have freedom of speech under glasnost. He also had perestroika, and that's on the economy. So the government allows some people to own small businesses, and this gives you an incentive to produce more. So it totally changed their economy. This democratization or capitalization, or becoming a capitalist society, allowed the citizens to also vote for their politicians, but it was only communist. So changed a little bit. Reagan's Star Wars forced Gorbachev to admit that the Soviet Union could not keep up in the arms race, so he withdrew his tanks from Eastern Europe. So these satellite nations, he withdrew their tanks. There was a 9-year war. The war in Afghanistan was ended under Gorbachev, so that helped their economy, but it made them kind of look bad. Reagan and Gorbachev worked together, and we agreed to reduce arms again, reducing Cold War tensions. So we agreed to end all medium-range intercontinental ballistic missiles. This was a huge achievement. So Gorbachev, the changes that he made, perestroika and glasnost in particular, eventually led to an end of communism because the satellite nations, were now going to hold elections, and they voted to not be communist. So they broke away from Soviet controls. And Gorbachev did not use the military, unlike his predecessors. He allows them to become free. So the end of the Cold War is symbolically in November on 1989, when the Berlin Wall was open to people to go back and forth. And eventually they took down the entire Berlin Wall. The Soviet Union is going to break down. And a lot of the reasons is for nationalism. The people want to be separate. So, for example, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania are the first to become independent from Russia that were actually Russian states, and they have a total different culture. So, other countries, Belarus, Ukraine, Moldova, um, Kazakhstan, they all became free between 1990 and 1991. The green countries are the satellite nations that are now democracies. So it was a huge change in the world at this time. And the Warsaw Pact is going to end. So here's the other countries at the southern part of Russia that are now free. So the Soviet Union now changes its name to Russia. So the end of the Cold War, you have Russia now and not the Soviet Union. I hope you learned something today about the 70s and the end of the Cold War.